Beirut, Lebanon, January 24th, 2004. Late afternoon, the winter sun casts long shadows across the Dahiyeh suburb south of the city, where narrow streets wind between concrete apartment blocks that have become fortresses. In this neighborhood, Hezbollah's yellow flags hang from balconies, where posters of martyrs watch the streets from bullet-scarred walls, and where security is maintained not by Lebanese police, but by armed men loyal to Hassan Nasrallah and the Party of God. The area is autonomous territory within Lebanon's fractured geography, a state within a state where outsiders are noticed immediately, and foreign intelligence operations face surveillance as sophisticated as any maintained by national governments. Along Rue Hadi Nasrallah, traffic moves in the irregular patterns of a working-class neighborhood in the late afternoon. Cars and motorcycles navigating between pedestrians and street vendors selling produce from wooden carts. Inside a silver Toyota Camry, parked 200 meters from a busy intersection, two men sit in silence. They wear the casual clothing of Beirut residents, jeans and leather jackets, nothing that would distinguish them from thousands of other men in the city. But beneath the driver's seat, concealed in a modified compartment, each carries a compact radio receiver synchronized to a specific frequency. They are Mossad officers operating under deep cover in hostile territory, their presence in Dahiyeh representing months of preparation, forged identities, and the kind of operational risk that intelligence agencies accept when targets of sufficient value present rare opportunities. Tonight, they are implementing the final phase of an operation that has consumed intelligence resources across 3 continents, required the development of specialized explosives compact enough to avoid detection during transport into Lebanon, and represents Israel's answer to the man responsible for more American and Israeli deaths than any other terrorist of his generation. 3 blocks away, attached to the undercarriage of a dark blue Mercedes sedan parked outside a pharmacy, a bomb waits. The device is sophisticated, designed by Israeli military engineers specifically for targeted assassinations in urban environments. It contains 2 kilograms of plastic explosive shaped to direct the blast upward through the vehicle's floor, killing occupants while minimizing damage to surrounding structures and pedestrians. The detonator is radio-controlled, requiring simultaneous signals from 2 separate transmitters to activate, a safeguard against accidental detonation or premature discovery. The bomb has been in position for 6 hours, placed during the pre-dawn darkness by a team that infiltrated Dahiyeh under cover identities so carefully constructed that even Hezbollah's counterintelligence network, which monitors this neighborhood with paranoid intensity, failed to detect their presence. The target is Imad Mugnieh, and at 16:45 hours, the surveillance team receives confirmation through encrypted radio that a vehicle matching the target profile is approaching from the north. The driver tenses slightly, his hand moving to the transmitter beneath his seat. His partner speaks quietly into a concealed microphone, confirming the sighting with other observation posts positioned around the neighborhood. The vehicle turns onto Rue Hadi Nasrallah, moving at moderate speed through late afternoon traffic. It is a dark blue Mercedes, license plate partially obscured by road dust, exactly matching the description provided by intelligence assets who have tracked Mugnieh's movements for months. The car approaches the pharmacy. The driver's thumb hovers over the transmitter button. At 16:47 hours, the bomb detonates. The target that Mossad had spent 18 months tracking to this specific street was not a foot soldier or mid-level operative, but the most wanted terrorist in the world. Imad Mugnieh, born in 1962 in southern Lebanon's Shiite villages, had by 2004 accumulated a record of attacks that made him simultaneously hunted by American, Israeli, French, and Argentine intelligence agencies. His operations had killed more Americans than any terrorist before September 11, 2001, and his methods, combining military precision with absolute disregard for civilian casualties, had established templates that other terrorist organizations would study and replicate for decades. The 1983 Beirut barracks bombing killed 241 United States Marines and 58 French paratroopers in simultaneous truck bomb attacks that demonstrated sophisticated operational planning and intelligence penetration. The 1985 hijacking of TWA Flight 847 resulted in the torture and murder of United States Navy diver Robert Steatham, whose body was dumped onto the Beirut airport tarmac while television cameras broadcast the humiliation globally. The 1992 bombing of the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires killed 29 people. The 1994 bombing of the AMIA Jewish Community Center in the same city killed 85 and wounded hundreds more. The deadliest terrorist attack in Argentine history. Mugnia was not merely an operational commander who planned attacks and selected targets, but Hezbollah's chief military strategist, the architect of tactics that transformed the organization from scattered militant factions into a disciplined force capable of conducting complex operations across multiple continents. He maintained networks in Europe, South America, and the Middle East, networks that facilitated bombings, kidnappings, and assassinations while evading the intelligence agencies hunting him. By 2000, the FBI had placed him on its most wanted terrorist list with a reward of $5 million for information leading to his capture. By 2003, Israeli intelligence assessed that eliminating Mugnia would degrade Hezbollah's operational capabilities more significantly than killing any other single individual in the organization's leadership structure, including Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah himself. Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon authorized the operation during a restricted security cabinet meeting in late 2003 after Mossad Director Meir Dagan presented intelligence indicating that Mugnia had established a pattern of movement in Beirut's southern suburbs that created a window of vulnerability. The meeting included Defense Minister Shaul Mofaz, Chief of Military Intelligence Aharon Zivi Farkash, and senior Mossad officers responsible for operations against Hezbollah targets. The discussion lasted 3 hours as officials debated operational approaches and potential consequences. Some advocated immediate military strikes against Hezbollah facilities in southern Lebanon, visible demonstrations of Israeli resolve that would satisfy public and political demands for action against an organization responsible for ongoing attacks against Israeli positions along the border. Others argued for covert assassination, a surgical operation that would eliminate Mugnia while maintaining plausible deniability and avoiding the broader military confrontation that overt Israeli action in Lebanon would likely trigger. Sharon ultimately authorized a targeted killing operation with specific parameters. Mossad would develop and execute a plan to eliminate Mugnia using methods that minimized collateral casualties and maintained operational security sufficient to preserve deniability. The operation would proceed only when intelligence confirmed Mugnia's location with confidence sufficient to justify the risks inherent in conducting sophisticated bombing operations in territory controlled by an organization with counterintelligence capabilities approaching those of state security services. Mossad received authorization to deploy whatever resources and personnel the operation required. The timeline was open-ended. Recognition that tracking and killing a target as elusive as Mugnia might require months or years of patient surveillance and preparation. Imad Fayez Mugnia, born July 12, 1962, in the village of Ter Dibba in southern Lebanon, emerged from the same Shiite communities that would later provide Hezbollah with its base of support and operational personnel. His family relocated to Beirut's southern suburbs during his childhood, settling in neighborhoods where Palestinian refugee camps created environments of militancy and resistance ideology. By his late teens, Mugnia had joined Force 17, Yasser Arafat's elite security unit, receiving training in explosives, surveillance, and the kind of operational tradecraft that would later make him one of the most effective terrorist operators of his generation. When Israel invaded Lebanon in 1982, Mugnier transitioned from Palestinian organizations to the nascent Hezbollah, recognizing that Shiite militancy offered opportunities and resources that Palestinian groups, weakened by internal divisions and Israeli military pressure, could no longer provide. What distinguished Mugnier from other terrorist operatives was not just his tactical skill or operational daring, but his absolute commitment to personal security that approached clinical paranoia. He never appeared in public without disguises. He changed residences constantly, never sleeping in the same location more than a few consecutive nights. He avoided telephones, conducting sensitive communications through couriers and face-to-face meetings in secure locations swept for surveillance devices before each use. He maintained multiple identities, complete with forged documents and established cover stories supported by associates who could confirm his presence in locations he had never visited. Western intelligence agencies possessed no confirmed photographs of him taken after the mid-1980s. The images that appeared on FBI wanted posters and Interpol notices were decades old, showing a young man whose appearance had certainly changed through age, weight fluctuation, and deliberate alteration. Multiple intelligence services had attempted to locate and eliminate Mugnier during the 1990s, operations that failed not because of inadequate resources or commitment, but because the target's security discipline rendered conventional surveillance methods ineffective. American intelligence tracked him to Damascus in 1994, lost him when he apparently detected surveillance and altered his patterns. French intelligence located him in Paris in 1995, but hesitated to authorize assassination on French soil for diplomatic reasons, and by the time approval came through channels, he had departed. Israeli intelligence nearly caught him in Beirut in 1996, but a bombing attempt failed when he changed vehicles at the last moment, apparently warned by instincts developed through years of operating under constant threat. The breakthrough came in mid-2003, when Mossad recruited a source within Hezbollah's administrative structure in Dahieh. The source provided not operational intelligence, which would have been closely guarded and compartmentalized, but mundane details about vehicle usage, apartment rentals, and patterns of movement that accumulated into a picture of Mugnier's support infrastructure. He maintained several safe houses in the southern suburbs. He used a rotation of vehicles, all registered to associates or front companies that were serviced at a specific garage in Dahieh. Most significantly, he followed routines, limited and irregular routines, but patterns nonetheless that careful surveillance could identify and predict. By December 2003, Mossad officers operating under deep cover in Beirut had identified 3 vehicles Mugnier used with varying frequency. All dark sedans, all maintained obsessively to avoid mechanical failures that might force him into vulnerable situations on public streets. They established surveillance positions near locations he was known to frequent and began the patient work of tracking his movements. Intelligence analysts in Tel Aviv assessed that they had achieved the most complete picture of Mugnier's operational patterns that any intelligence service had compiled in nearly 2 decades. The target was locatable. Whether he would be killable depended on precision that left no margin for error. Mossad assigned operational planning to Caesarea, the division responsible for covert operations in hostile territory and targeted killings of high-value subjects. Over 4 months beginning in September 2003, Caesarea officers developed the infrastructure required to conduct assassination operations in Dahieh, territory where Israeli presence was not merely unwelcome, but represented immediate mortal danger if detected. The operational environment presented challenges that made conventional surveillance and infiltration methods inadequate. Hezbollah maintained counterintelligence networks throughout the southern suburbs, monitoring strangers, tracking vehicle movements, and maintaining informant networks that reported suspicious activity to security officials who investigated anomalies with thoroughness approaching state-level intelligence services. Any Israeli operation would need to function within this environment of hostile surveillance, maintaining cover so convincing that even prolonged observation would reveal nothing suspicious. The solution involved recruiting Lebanese nationals willing to provide support services in exchange for money, ideology, or leverage that Mossad possessed through knowledge of compromising information. These assets would not participate directly in the assassination, which would expose them to immediate execution if discovered, but would provide vehicles, safe houses, and reconnaissance information that Israeli operatives could not gather without exposing themselves. Mossad officers posing as businessmen, aid workers, and students entered Lebanon through legal border crossings, establishing cover identities supported by documentation sophisticated enough to withstand inspection by Lebanese security services. They rented apartments in neighborhoods adjacent to Dahieh, positions that allowed surveillance of target areas without requiring presence inside Hezbollah-controlled territory. They purchased vehicles registered to their cover identities and established routines of movement that appeared consistent with their claimed professions. The surveillance phase consumed 3 months of patient observation. Teams tracked the vehicles identified through the source as belonging to Mugnia's support network, noting patterns of when they appeared, where they traveled, and who drove them. They photographed faces, recorded license plates, and documented every detail that might contribute to understanding the target's security arrangements. The picture that emerged confirmed both the possibility and difficulty of the operation. Mugnia used 3 primary vehicles, all dark sedans of different makes and models, rotated in patterns that appeared designed to frustrate surveillance by varying his profile. He never drove himself, always relying on drivers who were themselves trained in counter-surveillance techniques. The vehicles were serviced at a garage in Dahieh that Hezbollah controlled, making any attempt to plant tracking devices or bombs during maintenance impossible without compromising the entire operation through insider access that Mossad did not possess. Israeli military intelligence proposed using a remote detonated car bomb, the method that offered the best combination of lethality, precision, and operational security. Traditional assassination approaches, sniper fire, or close-range shooting would require positioning Israeli operatives in immediate proximity to the target in an environment where any suspicious presence would be investigated immediately and where escape routes were limited by Hezbollah's control of surrounding territory. A car bomb could be placed during hours of darkness, detonated from a safe distance, and would destroy the target vehicle completely enough to eliminate forensic evidence about the bomb's construction that might identify its origin. The bomb design fell to specialists within Israeli military intelligence who had developed shaped charges specifically for targeted assassinations. The device needed to be compact enough to attach to a vehicle's undercarriage without being visible to casual inspection. Powerful enough to kill occupants through directed blast force rather than shrapnel that might injure bystanders, and reliable enough to function after hours of exposure to weather and vibration from traffic passing over rough roads. The final design consisted of 2 kilograms of plastic explosive molded into a shaped charge that would direct the blast upward through the vehicle's floor, supplemented by magnesium components that would generate intense heat sufficient to incinerate the vehicle's interior. The detonator was radio-controlled with redundant receivers requiring simultaneous signals from 2 separate transmitters, safeguards against accidental detonation from random radio frequencies or premature discovery that might allow Hezbollah bomb disposal teams to study the device. The most critical element was target identification, the moment when surveillance teams would need to confirm that the vehicle they had targeted actually contained Mugnia rather than one of his drivers, associates, or family members who might use the same vehicles. Intelligence assessments indicated that Mugnia's brother, Fuad Mugnia, lived in Dahieh and occasionally used vehicles from the same pool that Imad accessed. The brothers maintained similar builds and coloring, both heavy-set men with dark hair and beards characteristic of Shiite Lebanese. In vehicles with tinted windows moving through traffic at normal speeds, distinguishing between them from surveillance positions 50 or 100 meters away would require absolute clarity of observation and judgment made under pressure with seconds to decide whether to detonate. Planners established protocols requiring confirmation from multiple observation posts before authorizing detonation, but acknowledged that perfect certainty might be impossible to achieve. The operation would proceed when intelligence indicated Mugnia was likely to use a specific vehicle. Surveillance teams confirmed the vehicle's movement toward a location where the bomb had been positioned, and visual observation provided confidence sufficient to justify the risks. What constituted sufficient confidence remained necessarily subjective, a judgment call that operators in the field would make based on training, experience, and the compressed timelines that characterize operations where targets appear briefly and vanish if opportunities are not seized immediately. On the evening of January 23, 2004, a three-man team entered Dahieh with a device concealed in a modified toolbox designed to appear consistent with equipment that mechanics or electricians might carry through residential neighborhoods without attracting attention. They drove a white van registered to a front company that Mossad had established months earlier, its paperwork documenting a small appliance repair business operating from an address in eastern Beirut. The cover was shallow, sufficient to withstand casual inspection, but unlikely to survive sustained investigation, which made speed essential. They reached the target street at 02:30 hours, a time when traffic had diminished to occasional vehicles, and pedestrians were scarce enough that their presence would be noticed by anyone observing. The dark blue Mercedes sedan was parked outside a pharmacy, positioned in a space that surveillance had confirmed the vehicle occupied frequently during overnight hours. One team member remained in the van, engine running, monitoring radio frequencies for any indication that Hezbollah security patrols had detected their presence. The other two approached the Mercedes with tools and the bomb, moving with the purposeful efficiency of workers executing routine maintenance, rather than the hesitation that would mark them as suspicious. The device attached to the undercarriage with industrial magnets that locked against the chassis with metallic clicks that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet street. The entire attachment sequence required 90 seconds. They returned to the van and departed at 0237 hours, their surveillance confirming no immediate response from Hezbollah security. By dawn, observation posts were established in positions that provided sight lines to the pharmacy and the surrounding streets. The teams had rehearsed the detonation sequence dozens of times, practicing the coordination required between spotters who would confirm target identification and the triggerman who would initiate the blast. The protocol required visual confirmation from two separate observation posts before detonation could proceed. Redundancy designed to prevent exactly the kind of identification error that would transform a precision strike into a catastrophic mistake. At 15:20 hours on January 24th, surveillance reported a dark blue Mercedes sedan departing from a location in northern Dahieh. The vehicle matched the description of the target car in make, model, and color, and its movement pattern suggested it was traveling toward the pharmacy area. The teams went to alert status, confirming communications and preparing for rapid execution if the vehicle approached the bomb location. At 16:30 hours, the Mercedes was observed moving south through Dahieh, its route consistent with approaching the pharmacy. The vehicle arrived at 16:45 hours, parking in the same space where the bomb had been positioned the previous night. The driver remained inside for several minutes, apparently waiting or conducting business that surveillance teams could not observe clearly through the sedan's tinted windows. From the primary observation post, the spotter studied the vehicle through binoculars, attempting to identify occupants through brief moments when light conditions and window angles provided glimpses of faces inside. The build appeared consistent with target profiles. The vehicle's presence at a location associated with Mugnia's patterns supported identification. At 16:47 hours, with confirmation from the secondary observation post, the decision was made. The triggerman activated both transmitters simultaneously. The bomb functioned exactly as designed, the shaped charge directing its force upward through the Mercedes floor in a blast that killed the driver instantly and transformed the vehicle into burning wreckage within seconds. The explosion tore through the Mercedes with force that lifted the vehicle's frame off the pavement before slamming it back down as a compressed mass of twisted metal and shattered glass. The shaped charge performed exactly as engineers had designed, directing blast energy upward through the floor and into the passenger compartment where occupants absorbed the full kinetic force of 2 kilograms of military-grade explosive detonating in a confined space. The driver died before neural pathways could register pain, his body subjected to overpressure that ruptured organs and severed major blood vessels in the milliseconds between detonation and the secondary effects of fire that consumed the sedan's interior. Flames erupted from the wreckage, fed by ruptured fuel lines and the magnesium components that generated heat intense enough to melt aluminum and steel. Black smoke rose in a column visible across Dahiyeh, a signal that would bring security forces and emergency responders within minutes. The blast was loud, but not catastrophic to surrounding structures. Windows in the pharmacy shattered from overpressure. Pedestrians within 30 meters were knocked down by the shockwave, suffering ruptured eardrums and minor shrapnel wounds from flying debris. But the shaped charge's directional design achieved its intended purpose, concentrating destruction on the target vehicle while sparing the apartment buildings and shops that lined Rue Hadi Nasrallah. 3 civilians sustained injuries serious enough to require hospitalization. None died. For operators trained to minimize collateral casualties while achieving lethal effects against specific targets, the blast represented technical success, a demonstration that precision weaponry could function as planned even in dense urban environments where calculation errors of centimeters or milliseconds meant the difference between surgical strike and mass casualty event. Within 2 minutes of the explosion, Hezbollah security personnel began arriving at the scene. They came in civilian vehicles, armed men wearing the casual clothing of Dahiyeh residents, but moving with the tactical discipline of trained soldiers establishing perimeter security around an attack site. They cordoned off the street, preventing civilians from approaching the burning wreckage, while others began systematic sweeps of surrounding buildings looking for observation posts or suspicious vehicles that might indicate surveillance teams had monitored the bombing. Lebanese civil defense firefighters arrived at 16:52 hours, suppressing the flames enough to approach the Mercedes and confirm what visual inspection from a distance had already suggested. The driver was dead, his body burned beyond immediate recognition, identifiable only through forensic analysis that would require hours or days to complete. From the primary observation post, 200 meters away, the Mossad surveillance team monitored the aftermath through high-powered optics, documenting Hezbollah's response while preparing for extraction. The explosion had functioned as planned. The vehicle had been destroyed completely. The occupant was dead. All indicators suggested operational success, the elimination of a high-value target through precisely executed technical operation that had required months of planning and preparation. The team leader transmitted a coded message to Mossad headquarters in Tel Aviv, confirming detonation and apparent success, language carefully calibrated to acknowledge that definitive confirmation of target identity would require additional intelligence collection. The first indication that something had gone wrong came at 17:45 hours when a source within Lebanese security services, a paid informant who provided information to multiple intelligence agencies in exchange for money and the leverage that such relationships provided, contacted his Mossad handler with preliminary information from the bombing scene. Lebanese investigators had recovered documents from the vehicle that identified the driver as Fouad Mugnia, age 36, a Hezbollah administrative official who managed construction projects and infrastructure development in the southern suburbs. The name meant nothing to the surveillance team initially. Another Hezbollah member, killed in what they assumed was an operation targeting Imad Mugnia. But when the information reached analysts in Tel Aviv, who maintained comprehensive databases on Hezbollah personnel and their family relationships, the significance became immediately and catastrophically clear. Fouad Mugnia was Imad Mugnia's younger brother, a civilian administrator rather than operational commander, a man whose role in Hezbollah's structure was logistical and bureaucratic rather than military. He had never been identified as a target. He had never appeared on any target list or operational planning document related to the assassination campaign. He was, according to every intelligence assessment and operational parameter that had guided the planning and authorization of this operation, a non-combatant whose death would constitute exactly the kind of collateral casualty that planners had worked to avoid. Imad Mugnia, the actual target, the man whose death would have justified the risks and resources committed to this operation, was alive, location unknown, almost certainly aware that Israeli intelligence had attempted to kill him and missed. The error's cause became apparent through subsequent intelligence analysis and debriefing of surveillance teams. Fouad and Imad Mugnia shared physical characteristics, both heavy-set men in their 30s with dark hair and the kind of generic appearance common to thousands of Lebanese men. Both used vehicles from the same pool maintained by Hezbollah's administrative services. Both had business or personal reasons to frequent locations in Dahiyeh, where Israeli surveillance had observed patterns of movement that analysts had attributed exclusively to Imad. The surveillance teams had identified the vehicle correctly as one that Imad Mugnia used. They had observed it at a location where Imad had been documented previously. They had made identification decisions based on partial visual observation through tinted windows under time pressure that precluded extended verification. The confluence of factors, vehicle match, location match, physical similarity, and time pressure had produced a false positive confirmation that sent the operation forward despite protocols designed specifically to prevent such errors. Intelligence gathering in the hours after the explosion revealed where Imad Mugnia had been when his brother died. He was in southern Lebanon, approximately 60 kilometers from Beirut, meeting with Hezbollah commanders responsible for military operations along the border with Israel. Multiple sources confirmed his presence there, his participation in discussions about weapons procurement and tactical planning that had kept him away from Beirut for 2 days. Whether his absence from Dahiyeh when the bomb detonated represented luck or some awareness that Israeli surveillance had intensified around his usual locations remained uncertain. Hezbollah maintained sophisticated counterintelligence capabilities. The organization's security officers monitored for patterns that might indicate foreign intelligence interest, unusual vehicles, faces that appeared repeatedly in areas where senior officials conducted business, any anomalies in the neighborhood's normal rhythms. Within hours of his brother's death, Imad Mugnia disappeared completely from Israeli surveillance. Sources who had provided information about his movements and patterns suddenly reported no activity, no sightings, no indication that he maintained any of the routines that had made him trackable before the bombing. He had gone to ground, implementing security protocols that assumed every previous safe house was compromised. Every associate was potentially under surveillance, Every vehicle was suspect. The failed assassination achieved the opposite of its intended effect, not eliminating the target, but alerting him to exactly how close Israeli intelligence had come, and forcing him to adopt security measures that would make future attempts exponentially more difficult. For the operators who had positioned the bomb, conducted the surveillance, and made the identification decision that led to detonation, the psychological impact was immediate and severe. They had killed a man, destroyed his body with fire and explosive force, caused suffering to his family and community, all in service of an operation that was supposed to eliminate one of Israel's most dangerous enemies. Instead, they had killed his brother, a civilian administrator whose death served no strategic purpose and whose killing would be characterized by Hezbollah, with justification, as evidence that Israeli targeting methods were indiscriminate and that Israeli claims of precision and restraint were propaganda rather than operational reality. The operator who had made the final identification confirmation, who had studied the vehicle through binoculars and transmitted the assessment that supported the detonation decision, described the moment of realization in subsequent debriefings with language that reflected both professional accountability and personal anguish. He had followed protocols. He had confirmed vehicle match, location consistency, and physical profile within the parameters that operational planning had established. He had made the judgment that intelligence officers operating under time pressure in hostile environments are trained to make, accepting reasonable confidence rather than perfect certainty, because perfect certainty is rarely achievable in operational conditions. But reasonable confidence had been insufficient. The margin of error that planners had accepted as unavoidable in real-world operations had produced exactly the catastrophic failure that protocols were designed to prevent. The extraction of Israeli personnel from Lebanon proceeded with urgency, driven by awareness that Hezbollah's counterintelligence services would intensify efforts to identify and capture foreign operatives following the bombing. The surveillance teams departed their observation posts within an hour of the explosion, abandoning equipment and materials that could not be removed quickly enough to prevent capture if Hezbollah security sweeps reached their locations. They traveled to prearranged extraction points using routes and methods designed to obscure their departure from Dahiyeh. Assets who had provided support services, the Lebanese nationals who had rented apartments and purchased vehicles, were evacuated or abandoned based on assessments of their exposure and value. Some received payments and instructions to relocate to other countries where Hezbollah's reach was limited. Others, whose association with the operation could not be definitively established by hostile counterintelligence, remained in place with instructions to cease all contact with Israeli intelligence until security conditions improved. By January 26th, all Israeli operatives directly involved in the bombing had departed Lebanon through border crossings into Syria and Jordan, routes that avoided Lebanese security checkpoints, where investigations into the Dahiyeh explosion might have identified travelers matching profiles of interest. They carried forged documentation and cover stories sophisticated enough to withstand routine inspection, but unlikely to survive the kind of enhanced interrogation that capture would have triggered. The operation that was supposed to deliver strategic victory through precision elimination of a high-value target had instead delivered intelligence failure, operational embarrassment, and the permanent psychological burden of having killed the wrong man in an operation where getting the wrong man meant that innocent, in the limited sense that anyone associated with Hezbollah could be considered innocent, blood had been spilled for nothing. Hezbollah's response extended beyond the immediate bombing scene to a comprehensive security operation across Dahiyeh and surrounding neighborhoods. Armed men established checkpoints on major roads, inspecting vehicles and questioning drivers about their destinations and recent movements. Security teams swept apartment buildings, looking for surveillance equipment, unfamiliar residents, or any indication that foreign intelligence services had established observation positions in the area. The organization's counterintelligence directorate initiated investigations into recent arrivals in Dahieh, cross-referencing rental records, utility connections, and vehicle registrations against databases of known patterns that might indicate cover identities. The operation represented recognition that the bombing required intelligence preparation and surveillance infrastructure that could not have been assembled overnight. Lebanese government authorities opened formal investigations into the explosion, though coordination with Hezbollah complicated efforts to establish clear chains of command and information sharing. The Lebanese internal security forces examined the bomb site, collected forensic evidence, and interviewed witnesses who had observed vehicles or individuals in the area before the explosion. Their conclusions, delivered to government ministers within 48 hours, confirmed what Hezbollah already knew. The bomb was sophisticated, military-grade explosive with shaped charge design characteristic of Israeli munitions. The placement and detonation suggested professional execution by operatives with specialized training. The target selection indicated access to detailed intelligence about Hezbollah personnel and their movement patterns. Israel maintained absolute official silence about the bombing. Government spokesmen declined to comment on security operations or intelligence activities, standard policy for operations that required deniability regardless of success or failure. Israeli media, operating under military censorship regulations that prohibited reporting on intelligence operations without government authorization, published only brief mentions of an explosion in Beirut attributed to unnamed sources. The silence confirmed nothing, but denied nothing, leaving international observers to draw conclusions based on the operation's technical sophistication and target selection. Hezbollah conducted Fouad Mugnia's funeral on January 26th, with ceremonies that drew thousands of mourners and extensive media coverage throughout Lebanon and the Arab world. Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah delivered a eulogy that characterized the bombing as evidence of Israeli terrorism and promised retaliation against targets that would be selected for maximum impact. The funeral procession through Dahieh streets demonstrated Hezbollah's organizational strength and popular support while serving as warning to anyone who might have provided assistance to Israeli intelligence. Banners displayed Fouad's photograph alongside text identifying him as a martyr killed by Zionist aggression, framing his death within narratives of resistance and sacrifice that Hezbollah used to mobilize support and justify future operations. The failed assassination produced consequences that extended beyond Fouad Mugnia's death to reshape Israeli intelligence operations in Lebanon and Imad Mugnia's security protocols for the remainder of his life. Hezbollah implemented counterintelligence measures throughout Dahieh that made subsequent Israeli surveillance operations nearly impossible. The organization established vehicle inspection protocols at entry points to the southern suburbs, requiring documented reasons for presence and checking identities against databases of known or suspected intelligence operatives. Senior officials adopted security measures that made them functionally invisible, abandoning routines, changing vehicles constantly, and conducting sensitive activities in locations that varied unpredictably. Imad Mugnia became even more elusive after his brother's death, operating with security discipline that bordered on paranoia. Intelligence sources reported that he changed appearance repeatedly, gained weight deliberately to alter his profile, and conducted meetings in secure facilities swept for surveillance devices before each use. The networks that had provided Israeli intelligence with information about his movements either ceased cooperation or reported no usable intelligence, whether from genuine inability to track him or from calculation that providing information had become too dangerous after the bombing demonstrated how close surveillance had penetrated Hezbollah's inner circles. He continued planning operations between 2004 and 2008, participating in preparations for the 2006 Lebanon War, and maintaining oversight of Hezbollah's external operations unit responsible for attacks outside Lebanese territory. But the visibility that had made him trackable in late 2003 never returned. Israeli intelligence attempted multiple times to re-establish surveillance networks capable of locating him, operations that consumed resources and personnel without producing opportunities comparable to what had existed before the Dahieh bombing. On February 12, 2008, Imad Mugnieh died in Damascus when a bomb concealed in the headrest of his vehicle detonated as he drove through the Kafr Sousa neighborhood. The operation, attributed to Israeli intelligence and possibly conducted with American assistance, demonstrated precision that the 2004 attempt had lacked. The bomb killed Mugnieh without significant collateral casualties, technical execution that suggested lessons learned from previous failures. Whether those lessons included improved identification protocols or simply reflected 4 additional years of patient intelligence gathering remained classified information that participating agencies never publicly disclosed. The men who participated in the 2004 Dahieh operation carried its failure as permanent professional and personal burden. They had executed an operation according to protocols and training, made decisions that reasonable intelligence officers operating under operational pressure would make, and killed the wrong man. The psychological weight of that error, combined with awareness that their mistake had allowed one of the world's most dangerous terrorists to escape and operate for 4 additional years, defined their reflections on careers spent conducting operations where success and failure were measured in lives taken and threats eliminated or missed.